Cool. All right. Well, let's get started. So good afternoon. Nice to see you all, and thank you for joining us. Some of you will know me and have had lots of conversations with me, but I'm Anya Kemble. I'm one of the coaches working at Mutual Ventures, and I'll be chairing the conversation today. And I'm excited to be joined by colleagues at DXW who will introduce themselves in a moment. But DXW are our technology experts working alongside Mutual Ventures. And our coaches to support clusters, particularly when you're thinking about the technology that you'll need to support your fostering recruitment hubs. So I'm joined today by Isabel, Gaz, Nikki and Alex, and they'll all introduce themselves in a moment so you can hear exactly what they do within DXW, and they'll talk a bit about how they can support you as well. So the focus of today's webinar is thinking about how you get the technology right for your fostering recruitment hub. And particularly, we'll be thinking and discussing about what local authorities clusters should be thinking about to ensure you get the technology right, and how we can support clusters to think about that as you work through your implementation phase. So before we get to intros, just a reminder on the purpose of the programme and why we're all here. As you know, this is all about increasing the recruitment of foster carers to provide more loving homes for our most vulnerable children. And a central focus of the programme is creating recruitment hubs as a service across groups of local authorities called clusters to manage the foster carers' journey from initial inquiry to approval. And a key part of this is thinking about how the recruitment hub can be a single point of contact for those inquiring to foster and provide that crucial ongoing emotional and practical advice during the approvals process. Thank you to those of you who have already submitted questions for today. If you have questions during the discussions and as we hear from DXW, please feel free to pop those in the chat. I'll try to get to as many of those as possible, but any we don't cover, we can pick up after, either directly with your coaches or in conversations with DXW. And just to say they're here and available for individual conversations with coaches and clusters about the support you need. And we know that some of those are happening already, which is really exciting. So I'll turn to our panelists now who can introduce themselves. Isabel, did you want to start?
Thanks, Anya, and hi everyone. I'm Isabel. I'm head of strategy at DXW, and I help organisations understand their problems and form plans for change.
Great. Gaz, did you want to go next?
Sure. Hey everyone, I'm Gaz Aston. I'm head of interaction design at DXW, and my role is helping to make sure that the services that we create are intuitive and accessible for people to use. Nikki?
Hi everyone, I'm Nikki. I'm head of development at DXW, so I work with our clients to help ensure their technology is performance, secure, scalable, all that good stuff, delivering working software with our technology team.
And Alex.
Hi, I'm Alex. I'm head of service design here at DXW. I'm especially focused on thinking about this as a service, so over and above the technology, if you like, and the journey for all users, including the fostering teams.
Great. Nice to meet you all. And hopefully there'll be some really interesting discussion today to get clusters thinking about the technology elements of your recruitment hubs and also how you might kind of engage with DXW and your coaches for support as well. So we don't need to come to all of the solutions today, but it's more to kickstart some of that thinking. So before we get into the specific conversation, it would be worth, Isabel, if you could just give us an outline of the kind of specific areas that DXW can support clusters with as they work through the implementation of their hubs.
Yeah, sure. So as you mentioned, we're helping with the technology and the bits around that, and we've been doing that with public and third sector organisations since 2008. So we're multidisciplinary, as we've sort of introduced ourselves, meaning we research, design, deliver, build and run public services, and we'll be supporting the clusters up until March 2024. So we can advise you and support you on those technology parts, which will include the website or the front door for potential foster carers to make their inquiries, and also the technology that enables your teams to run their hubs well. So our experts and the team here and a couple of others can help in a number of ways depending on what you need. So perhaps that might be helping you get the most from your recruitment hub website, or it might be helping you on the specifics around the design of that website. It might be helping you think through the strategy when you're choosing a case management system, or perhaps we're thinking about research, or with foster carers or internal users.
Great, thank you, Isabel. And I suppose the key thing to take away there is there's quite a broad range of support that DXW can offer, and can be tailored to where specific clusters are in terms of their thinking around technology for their recruitment hubs. We'll also share after this webinar a bit of a high-level one-pager with the clusters, so you can think about where support might be useful, and also so that when you work through your implementation phase, you can dip in to different elements of the support as you work through the technology that you're getting set up for your hubs. Okay, so if we go to the first question, we know, as you mentioned, Isabel, local authorities have lots to think about as they work through implementation, and they're particularly thinking about what a website in their recruitment hub might look like and how it will act as a single front door for their recruitment hub, and also that kind of case management element, so how they track inquiries and monitor the performance of the hub. From your perspective, what key technology considerations should be at the forefront when clusters are implementing their fostering recruitment hubs? So we'll go to you first, Isabel.
Thanks, Anya. So we wanted to start our answer to this question by mentioning what we actually mean when we say technology. So as well as thinking about the technical systems and the websites you'll use to run your hubs, we think that technology also has a wider meaning, and it's worth kind of setting that out. So to get the technology right, we're thinking about more than just the technology itself. We're thinking about the process that that technology enables. We're thinking about the people that use the technology. Perhaps we're thinking about the data that's collected and stored in the systems, the organizations, the local authorities supporting the technology, and perhaps the other systems as well that the technology you're going to be using connects to. And that all probably sounds like a lot to think about, a lot to cover, but we suggest a good place to start thinking about your technology is by thinking about the people who it's intended for and those that will use it. And I'm going to, I think, pass to Gaz to come in here.
Thanks, Isabel. Yeah, like Isabel said, it's really a good place to start when you're making decisions about technology, by thinking about who your users are, what their needs are, and the kind of things that drive their behaviour. Consider things like what does their entire journey through the service looks like, which I hope Alex is going to be able to touch on later. Think about whether your technology choices enable a seamless experience for all users. And that means no gaps or dead ends for people when things don't necessarily follow what we might call the happy path through the service journey. It's really important to remember too that local authority colleagues are users of the service as well, be it from a different perspective. They deserve a service that's optimised to meet their needs, and that would differ slightly from those of prospective foster carers. It's also important to think about accessibility when you're making technology choices. And what do we mean by accessibility? I'm sure most people know, but it's worth reiterating that an accessible service is one that doesn't exclude anyone simply because of a disability or an impairment, or things like the devices that are available to them or the connectivity that they have. Like, you shouldn't need to have super fast broadband to use this kind of service. And technology choices can have quite an impact on how accessible your service is. So things to think about are, if you're using an off-the-shelf technology, does it meet accessibility requirements? If you are making your own technology solution, are you factoring in accessibility during the design and build process rather than it being an afterthought that you kind of bolt on? And I'm going to hand over to Nikki to talk a little bit more about some of the things that you could think about when you are choosing the technology.
Lovely, thanks, Gaz. Yeah, so as Gaz said, understanding the user needs, that's really where it kind of all starts from. And thinking about the hubs, that's likely to be the foster carers and the prospective foster carers. Once you've got that understanding, as Gaz touched on, you can start thinking about ease of use for you and your teams as well as a whole other set of users when you're using the admin backend to administer and operate the website and the service. Where will you be when you're using the app? Are you going to be out and about on your phone, or are you going to be mostly in the office? So I've got quite a few points here, so I'm going to try and keep it relatively streamlined. So the next thing to think about is, what data are you collecting? It's quite sensitive data, the foster carers and potential foster carers. So you need to know whatever systems you're using are secure, follow industry standards. We've got regulations like the Data Protection Act, which is a huge topic in itself. We can go into a bit more detail on that later, perhaps, if anybody has any questions. You're probably already certified to things like ISO 2007 and 1001. I know everyone hates hearing about all these sort of boring numbers. It can feel a bit onerous, but it's all intended to help keep your kind of user data secure. And it's also the right thing to do, bearing in mind the sensitivity of the data. So thinking about security more generally, not just how you're storing that data and how you're transferring the data, but things like who has access to what parts of the system. Do you have security audit logs so you can see who's been viewing what and what they're doing with it? If you're planning to use another service, how secure is that? What guarantees do you get from the provider? Does the login system enforce good password practices, for example? There's a whole kind of checklist of things that you can run through there. If you're building something yourself, then you need to have those sort of security standards in mind, so it's harder to hack it. And really important because the stakes are quite high, thinking about, what someone could do with that data if they weren't supposed to have it. So another thing to think about is flexibility. How adaptable do you need the system to be? How often will you be updating it? Not just in terms of the content, but also the functionality. So maybe as you start using the system and you're hearing from your users, maybe you're getting bug reports, you might realize you need to change something about it. And how easy will it be for you to do that? Are you going to be able to manage it yourselves, or will you have to go and ask somebody else to do it? How quickly will they be able to do that? How much will it cost? All those sorts of things. And then thinking about performance in a couple of different ways. I think, Gaz, you mentioned briefly there the kind of actual performance of the website, how quickly it loads. Does it work on mobile phones and tablets? The faster the page loads, the kind of better the user experience. So that's kind of what we're really aiming for. Thinking about the unhappy path also, as Gaz mentioned, does it cope with people typing in dodgy data? What happens if they get their email address wrong? There's all sorts of edge cases that kind of need to be teased out. And then there's performance in terms of what happens if there is an error on the site or something's not running, not working at all. And it sounds like a really silly question, but what happens if everything's been working, you launched, it's beautiful, it's been working really well for a couple of weeks, and then you come into work one Monday morning and things are kind of quiet, you haven't had as many responses as you normally get. How do you tell what's going on? How do you tell if that's just a normal, it's been a quiet weekend, or if there's something blocking responses from coming through? And I think this goes back to what Isabel you were saying right at the very beginning as well, about how this is not just thinking about the website and not just thinking about the kind of technology solution, because it's also about those processes that you have around it. Whose responsibility is it to go and check if things are working? Whose responsibility is it to fix problems or report them to whoever it is, if you're having an external supplier? And then the final point to make, I think, please jump in, anybody, if I've missed anything, is just to think about the kind of foundation of this, I suppose, is the practicalities that we are dealing with, which is the resources and the budget that we have in the teams. Because doing all of this really well does, cost money and then time, and that's both kind of upfront costs to get you going and obviously ongoing as well.
Thank you.
Thanks.
That's great. And I suppose there's some really important points in there. I know that lots of the clusters you're already thinking about how you're going to involve foster carers throughout the kind of implementation phase, not just with technology, but with the design of your hub, the journey through your hub. So I think really important to think early on about when you're looking at technology solutions and you're thinking about the website design and what the journey through the website looks like and how you're going to track and monitor inquiries. You're making sure that foster carers can be involved where it's relevant, and then equally your staff within local authorities, particularly those kind of fostering managers and experts who are already doing these processes within local authorities. And then as you recruit your hub staff, making sure you build in that time to do that testing and that training, because probably this will be a new process or a different way of doing things. So it's important to kind of build that time in. And equally, a couple of other reflections from some of what you said. I think it also shows how important it is to make sure when you're setting up your kind of data or case management system working groups that will work through these kind of identifying the right technology, you make sure you identify the right staff to support that. So you'll all have kind of project managers within your clusters, but also thinking about colleagues across the cluster that need to be involved to make sure you're making those decisions around security, reliability, that sort of thing. And these are some of the things that DXW can help and advise you with. So when you start to look at specific solutions, they'll be able to support you with thinking about those security elements and making sure you've got something robust in place to support your recruitment hub. That's been really useful. So if we then think about kind of the approach local authorities should take in identifying technology. When local authorities are thinking about solutions for their website or their front door element and the kind of solution to track and monitor inquiries coming through the hub, would you say they should lean towards procuring a new system or maximising existing resources?
I can make a start answering this and then again pass over. So I think to answer that question, when deciding whether to build something new, enhance what is already there, or procure a new system, it's a good idea to start by thinking about the current technology in detail. So considering what technology you have in place, what it does, how well it does it, and how well it does it in relation to what you expect to need to do with the delivery of the hubs. So understanding what this future service needs to do is also important, as well as understanding what the current technology does. Once you've identified what your current technology is and how well it performs, you'll want to really thoroughly understand that future service and start to determine whether your existing technology will be sufficient to meet the requirements. And whilst you're doing that, think about whether your existing technology could meet the needs of your current and your future users and the potential foster carers. So next, you want to think about, if you've got technology in place, could it be adapted? Could it be enhanced to meet those requirements and those user needs? And when doing so, think about the cost of changing the technology and whether that cost is going to be sustainable in the future. It's also important to think about capability and capacity. Do you have the team members and the skills you need to enhance the technology? Will you need to identify a partner or contractors to support you? And again, what cost will that be and how long will it take? So if your investigations about your current technology reveal that it isn't sufficient for the purpose, you want to consider the alternatives. And the first thing to do would be some market research to uncover what technologies and systems are available. And I know some of you have already started doing that. And then once you've identified some, you want to evaluate them to understand if they meet your requirements, and again, what will they cost, and compare the information you find about what's on the market against what you know about your existing technology. And say on the basis that you identify an off-the-shelf product to buy, you want to think about how you go about procuring it, and then how you'll actually implement it, and then whether it will actually need some further development once it's been implemented. One option might be to procure technology via a framework that your council is already on, or perhaps you need to identify a new supplier to buy something from. And when you're doing so, again, thinking about the sustainability of that product and how are you going to start using it? How will you migrate your existing data to the new technology you take on? You also want to think about how what you buy will connect with the other systems at your council that needs to. I think on that note, there's probably more technology considerations that Nikki might want to pick up.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Yeah, no, that's a great overview. I think there's a huge amount of detail that we could get into here, so I'm not going to try and go into all of it at this point, but I think you mentioned a few really key points. So things like if you are changing systems, how will you migrate your existing data to it? Sort of the interoperability of the different systems, and also how will you get your data out of it if you need to? Because if you're using a third-party supplier, it's very sad, but sometimes companies go bust. The worst situation I could imagine being in is having gone into a system and then kind of being locked into it and having to undertake another horrible migration a few years down the line because you can't get your data out of the system easily. I think considering if doing things in-house could be the right fit. I think things to consider in that case would be, development teams are expensive and this is hard, design and development teams. So thinking about risk management, what will happen if if the project goes over budget? What will happen if the project goes over time? What are your sort of what are your key parts of the delivery that you could say, well, we'll do this first, so that, you know, if we don't get anywhere further than that, then we've at least got the kind of minimum system going that would actually do something valuable. If you're thinking about working with a third party, or even doing something yourself, thinking about the likely traffic patterns. So how much sort of use are you expecting from the website? How many people are you expecting to come along? Because this sort of the system's design would be very different based on whether you're expecting kind of tens or hundreds of thousands. There's a spectrum there, and costs obviously, you know, change accordingly. Again, thinking about, yeah, security issues and bugs and things like that, having those processes in place with your teams to work out who will be doing what at the end of the day. Does anyone else want to jump in there? Or otherwise I'll hand over to Anya.
Yeah, sounds good. I mean, I think, oh, Gaz, go on.
Yeah, just got a couple of things that I'd like to add to this point, and that's if you are procuring a new system or enhancements to an existing system, some things to think about might be, can you speak with other users, purchasers of that solution, or clients of that supplier? And if you can you ideally speak with people that have the same or similar needs as you, have solved a similar problem? Think about how customizable that scenario is, and if customization requires a supplier, what level of service can they provide? How quickly can they get things changed? Is there like a wait time? If you're procuring an off-the-shelf solution, then what are the options for testing that with users before or during procurement? And if you are procuring a bespoke solution, are there other organizations that you can partner with, maybe to share costs and the things that they've learned and the challenges that they faced? It's quite likely that your problem has already been solved elsewhere. There aren't many new problems under the sun. So if that's the case, what can people that have been there before share with you in terms of the things that they learned, how they made their decisions, what was tough, what was easy?
Thanks, Gaz. And I think that's a really good point, and something that we're really committed to doing in the programme is sharing between the clusters, and also from the North East's experience of being slightly ahead on this, even though they're still a pathfinder in learning. A couple of points, and then I'll come to a question that's come in the chat. I think that understanding what technology you have at the moment is really crucial, and I know lots of clusters are already doing kind of mapping and working together to understand what their as-is recruitment processes look like, what kind of technology sits under that. So definitely something to pick up as well with your coaches, if you know you want to do a workshop and bring together the right colleagues into the room to really understand in detail what technology you're currently using and whether there's opportunities to take advantage of that as you develop your recruitment hubs. And also I think a really good point that you might not be able to have everything completely perfect for go live day one. And I know that's something we heard last week from the North East as well, that they're continuing, you know, their strong relationship with the delivery partner that they've used to get their case management system in place. And that's something that's definitely important as you work through the implementation phase, working out what you need in place for go live day one, such as your website, for example, and where there might be things that you know you're going to continue to add on. And then I think the sustainability point is really important as well. So making sure that as a cluster, you're thinking about identifying solutions that work for your recruitment hub and enable you to go live, but are also going to enable you to kind of continue that journey post go live as well, and are sustainable from a kind of cost and ongoing running perspective. So we just had a question in the chat, which I might come to you first on, Nikki. So someone's asked about the webinar last week with the North East, where, as I said, they spoke about how they've been working with a delivery partner who kind of helped them to develop a bespoke system, particularly for their case management. And I know they've also supported them with their website. What are your thoughts on clusters kind of creating a bespoke system rather than buying something off the shelf?
So the easy answer, which nobody will probably want to hear, is it kind of depends. Sorry, but it really does. I think that, so with sort of build versus buy is the term that is sort of used around the kind of industry. Typically, it tends to come down to things like, what's your core business, right? If your core business is something that nobody else knows as well as you, and the domain is something that nobody else knows as well as you, and you're the best at it, then you have to build because nobody else is going to do that. I'm not sure that that applies in this case. I know that there are some, well, there's certainly like case management systems, and I know there's some specialised foster carer and management systems as well. So they're probably worth having a look at. I think the other thing to bear in mind with building something completely new and bespoke is just to be very aware going in of the risks and the time and the costs, because all of those are huge when you're doing something all for yourselves. And if you can do that and you've got to, you know, get some advice and we can help with that, and you think you can do it, go for it. It'll be great fun. It'll, you know, be a fantastic tool and fantastic service at the end of the day, but just be very aware of what you're doing before you start down that path. I think I would, yeah, caveat with. I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything to that.
I'd just say that every time that everything that you build is a thing that you have to maintain, and that's often a thing that can be forgotten.
That's helpful. And yeah, Nikki, I was anticipating that it might be a case by case basis, and we know that that's the case in all the clusters. You're going to have slightly different approaches, and there's opportunities to learn from one another as you go through this process, but also very much the benefit of this program is also tailoring it to your kind of individual regional needs and the approach that you're taking. Okay, so that's really useful. I suppose we've slightly touched on this in terms of what you might have ready for go live versus, you know, what a long-term system might look like. But what do you think are the kind of realistic goals that can be achieved within the tight timeframes that we know that the local authority clusters are working towards in terms of the technology that they procure or identify?
So again, I can kick off and then pass to others to add. So I think we know your timeframes are quite small, and it's really important to make sure the goals you set are realistic in order to achieve them. And so we'd advise that you start to think as small as possible, and wherever possible, do less at any one time to avoid trying to do everything you need to for day one, because some stuff can follow later on. And in order to do that, we suggest adopting an agile approach or mindset to how you deliver. So agile might be something that some of you are familiar with, and others it could be new. It's a method for software delivery, but also delivery more broadly. The principles are helpful, and we champion at DXW. So what agile means, it means working iteratively and collaboratively, and again focusing on the user, the customer, the internal user. As we've mentioned, it still requires all the usual governance, risk management, but also embeds flexibility in what you're doing. And no one needs to be experts in agile or to follow methods strictly. So stick to what you know when you're implementing or delivering your new technology. So whilst embodying some of the principles of agile that might be helpful in order to meet your time frame of spring next year. And why agile is particularly useful is that it happens in distinct phases. So often you're undertaking research when you speak to the people who use the technology and discover what's needed. And I know, again, some clusters have already done this. And once you've gained insight through research, you then move to a design phase, designing your service, your hub, your website. And that can be done in multiple ways, from quick paper activities to sort of longer high fidelity prototypes, and again, to flex with the time frame you have. The most important thing about the ideas that you generate through design is that you get to test them and learn from them with the people that will use the end service or product. And then you move to a phase of build or implement, depending on whether you're doing that bespoke build or you're implementing something off the shelf. And another phase, as Gareth previously mentioned, is that live phase, when you roll your service out and real users are using it. And this phase needs to really be considered and planned as early as possible. So this all obviously sounds probably like a lot to fit in, but I think the thing about having the phases is that they can be condensed to fit your timescales, and they can be as small or long as they need to be. And as we know, some of you might have already completed some of those earlier phases of the work. And in addition, to make that sort of design, build, or implementation more realistic in your shorter time frame, we also suggest you focus on creating the minimum viable version of what the end product website hub is. And what we mean by minimum viable is that smallest slice of the end product that will fulfill the needs of the people who are using the service. And in order to identify that minimum viable slice, it requires prioritization and the ability to, and the confidence to identify what the most valuable part to focus on first is. So that requires pushing out the nice to haves and until you have released something, which would be in March next year. And then the idea, like we said in the Northeast, is to continue to build on what you have once it's gone live, enhancing and improving it through real usage. But for this to all work well, there is another job to set the expectations of the stakeholders and the users so that they know what to expect on day one, and then they know what to follow after that point. I think another quick point around goals. Realistic goals can also be reflected in your measures of success and performance indicators that you form as part of the delivery of the service, which I think Anya's helping the clusters with. So, for instance, one indicator might be how quickly you're aiming for take-up of the service and how that happens over what time frame. Did Gaz want to add in here?
Yeah, I've got a couple of things to add. Mostly reiterating things that you've said really about agile delivery. So I've spent a lot of time at the kind of coalface of agile software delivery, and some of the things that I think are key are being able to test the things that you're making early and test them often. Almost take a scientific mindset, like what's the smallest experiment we can conduct here to validate whether our thing works or not. So figure out what the smallest thing that you can test is. Identify the parts of your service that carry the most risk. It's up to you to decide what risk means, but design and test solutions to those things as early as you can. You will get things wrong along the way, it's inevitable. So try and design a process that allows for those mistakes to happen really early on, and then you get the chance to learn from them. And really importantly, progress will always beat perfection. And a key principle of agile thinking is that you can add something of value to deliver something of value for your users regularly and often, however small those improvements might be. And an added benefit of that is that smaller changes are easier to go back on if you find that those things don't quite work.
Alex?
Can I? Yeah. Listen, I think there's some really interesting things being said in the Q&A as well, and I just wanted to sort of expand on this idea of agile thinking, and shall we say, not waiting till you're completely done to deliver the big thing. So I think there are an awful lot of things that can be done, even, shall we say, or even quote unquote offline, so separate from building a website. Certainly around generating early inquiries through marketing and comms, and engaging with people where they really exist in the flesh, if you like. So some of that can really early engagement could actually just get you the kind of the leads, the names and the numbers of those that are potential foster carers right up front, but then you can pass into the various kind of agencies, if you like, without necessarily the need for all the development of the forms and the back end. So there is, thinking about the timeline, I actually think there is quite an impact that can be made fairly swiftly, if you like, but it does require that you understand what the needs of those potential foster carers are, and especially what their concerns might be around that sort of the regulatory kind of stuff as well. So clearly it's not just about getting names and numbers, as it were, but I do think there's quite a lot you can do upfront in a very agile way, light touch way, if you like, almost a kind of low tech way, dare I say it, when we're talking about technology, that can really engage with people at a very human level.
Thank you. And I think that's a really good point. We know that in your clusters, lots of your recruitment also happens face to face and in the community. And we know that there's a variety of ways that you recruit depending on, you know, the size of your region and how you operate. So definitely one of the key things I know that some clusters have started to think about, and you will think about as you kind of design the journey through your hub, is how, if you meet a prospective carer in the community, do they come through to your recruitment hub, and how do you make sure that journey is seamless, prompt, supportive? And those are some of the key things that we know the programme is about. And I think the iteration point and kind of learning as you go is really important. We know that, again, it's not just the technology element that's going to require all of the clusters to be quite kind of pragmatic and iterate as you work through this, because of the timescales and the number of different things that you need to think about. Being able to kind of iterate and test ideas will be really important. And I think we heard that from the Northeast again last week when they were talking about some of the processes they've got in place. You know, they don't know 100% whether they work or not. It's about having something to support go live and support the operation of the hub, and then reviewing that through the governance processes you're setting up to see what works. I just quickly wanted to come to one of the points actually in the chat. So someone made a really good point about the importance of information governance and information governance colleagues that will be working within local authorities already, and starting to think about the DPIA, the information governance processes early, which again, we heard from the Northeast last week. I wondered if you all had any thoughts about how important it is that clusters understand the data they want the hub to collect at the very start of their technology journey. Nikki, I can see you nodding. Did you want to come in first?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. I think I saw a cartoon about this on the internet recently, which was about information governance in central or local government. And yes, I think if you know that you're recording sensitive data and you know that there's an IT requirement or a governance team, just get talking to those people as like now, you know, as soon as possible, because you know, the holdup is going to be, oh, well, we didn't hear about this until now, and it's going to take a month to get somebody to sign off on this thing, and then your deadline is kaput. So I think the advice was go and talk to everybody that you think you need to speak to, and as well as asking them, you know, what is it that they need from you, ask them who else you should be speaking to, and just cast that web out further and further to try and narrow that down as quickly as possible. I don't know if anyone else has any other advice on that. It's hard.
Yeah, it is, but that's definitely a key message, both that we've heard from the Northeast and that we know clusters are thinking about, is getting the right people in the room early, so that you don't then kind of get a long way along the process or start designing, or you've identified the technology solution you're going to go with, and people don't feel engaged, or it's really not going to work with existing local authority processes. So that's really helpful, and I think a really good point to start thinking about that early. We talked a lot about users and how we think about their needs and put them at the kind of forefront of design. And I wondered, Gaz and Alex in particular, how can clusters adopt user-centered approaches, viewing the technology through the lens of both prospective carers as well as their future kind of recruitment hub teams who are handling inquiries?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about this. I'll start by talking about what we really mean when we say user-centered. What does user-centered design and research mean? It's a way of describing an approach that puts your users at the product or of your product or service at the heart of the design and development process. So some of the core tenets of what I'll refer to as UCD from here on are user research, so understanding who your users are, what they need. As I mentioned at the very start, what drives their behavior. Usability testing, so observing real users as they interact with your product or service, invaluable. Iterative working, as we've already mentioned in our section on Agile, so a rhythm of making changes and improvements based on the things that you learn along the way through usability testing and other methods. Accessibility, which has been mentioned a couple of times, so ensuring that your product or service doesn't exclude anybody for reasons that might include disability or any kind of impairment or access to certain technologies, etc. And finally, co-design is frequently an approach that's added to UCD processes, where all efforts are made to include users and stakeholders as closely as possible in the design and decision-making process. And there's an old saying, nothing about us without us, which I really like when we refer to co-design. So what are the advantages, after all that, of being user-centered? Following a user-centered design philosophy will remind you quite frequently that you are not your user. Testing sessions are always turning up surprising results that help you reduce the size of your blind spot. Just when you think you know your product or service inside out, someone will come along and show you that you really don't. Keeping users at the center of your design process means that you don't have to make guesses about the things that they need, and ultimately user needs are what we're trying to put in the middle of all of this. And by eliminating guesswork, you ultimately reduce risk. And when we say that, what we really mean is you reduce the amount of time and money that you spend on delivering your service. As I mentioned at the top as well, local authority colleagues are users of your service too, but they have a different perspective. It's equally important to provide a seamless experience for those users because they're providing the service that supports the end users. Research is a team sport. It's a bit of a cliche, but it's completely true. And when you seek to understand your users, you should make sure to include as wide a range of people on the team as possible. We always say that researchers might lead and steward research activities, but it's beneficial for everyone on the team, whatever your role is, to know as much as possible about your users and the needs that they have. And quite a popular thing to do is to get senior stakeholders to observe usability testing sessions. It's a great way to keep them in touch with your successes and your challenges and your status, where you're at with your product or service. I want to just talk specifically a little bit about prototyping as well. It's really important to understand that you don't need to have a completed product or service before you test it with users. It's possible to make a very testable version. Is it possible to make a testable version of your future service with tools that you already have access to? A good example that I like to mention is a company that I used to work with some years ago. One of the services that we came up with was a community meal sharing service. And before we even wrote a line of code or designed anything for that, we were able to test demand for it by using a spreadsheet and a mobile phone. So, you know, what can you do with what you already have to figure out what you need? Some parts of your service may be in a more finished state than others. When you go through the journey, there might be some gaps. So how can you create facades for the bits that aren't quite complete so that you can test in a more joined up and end-to-end fashion with your users? And my final point is that prototyping isn't limited to things that are on screen. You can prototype and test telephone conversation scripts, in-person interactions, printed materials, letters, that kind of thing, which may all be relevant here. That's it for me. Alex?
Yeah, there's a couple. Thanks, guys. There's a couple of things there I wanted to kind of just call out a little bit more. First of all, of course, there is already history. So there are already those that have gone through these processes and successfully gone on to become foster parents. So obviously there's a huge opportunity to utilize their experience, their lived experiences, to understand, you know, what works and what wouldn't, what didn't work. So because, you know, ultimately we want to make a better service, a better experience than before, right? Because we want to drive up numbers of potential foster carers. So harnessing that goodwill and those experiences of those previous foster carers. And then there's also this thing about your internal teams. So they do this for a day job. So they're doing this probably under incredible pressure, a lot of stress, and anything that can be done to help make their time both more efficient, easier to do, easier tools to work with, and probably aiming to reduce the amount of pure admin that they have to do as well. So maybe looking to release some of their time from some of the more challenging questions, if you like. So it's that old thing about having to log on and log off of ultimate, you know, different digital products throughout your daily life, and how best to avoid that kind of thing. So really thinking about how productive and effective your internal teams can can be, because of course we create a nice shiny front door, but the internal workings are kind of rusty and falling apart, if you like. That's going to affect the experience of the potential foster carers, but it's also the morale, of course, isn't it, and everything like that are around the internal teams. I think the last point is talking about sort of prototyping, and I think Christos, you have had a question in the chat about how much information to put on websites, and the testing websites is not just about knowing whether it's obvious which button to press or where to go next. It's also about testing the content that's on there, because without content, a website is quite literally a hollow vessel. And when it comes to testing how much information to put on about what fostering actually means, that's a really good thing that you can test with both former users, but also new users as well. So think about testing all of those things to get what works in your area as well, because what works in your area might be slightly different from what works in another kind of cluster. Yeah, I again bringing those lived experiences in as well. I would, without, at the risk of solutionizing, but actually seeing foster parents talking about what it is to be a foster parent is going to be a very, very powerful thing. Not just the positives, but also the things to look out for. I think people really do value honesty and transparency when they're going through these processes to help them with their decision making, because it is, as we know, a very big thing. So yeah, so hopefully a few more points there.
Thank you, that's really useful. And I think an important takeaway there for the clusters on the webinar and who will watch the recording is that these are some of the things that DXW can help you to think about. So when you're thinking about what does your website look like, what does good content look like, what information might you want to share on a website, what script or approach might you take on a telephone call, these are the sorts of things that DXW can help you to think about, and also help you to think about how you test with users given the tight timescales and the fact that we won't be able to do absolutely everything perfectly. So definitely pick up where you've got some of these specific questions with your coaches, and they can help you to talk through that with them, DXW. So I'm going to bring us to a close in a second, but I wanted to ask kind of one quick fire question before I do, which is, I suppose, to our colleagues from DXW, what's your one top tip you'd give to clusters when they're thinking about technology for their recruitment hub? Isabel, did you want to kick us off?
I think sharing what you do with the other clusters wherever possible, so you can learn from each other, and hopefully less duplication and doing the same thing.
Amazing. And Gaz?
Yeah, nothing that I haven't said before. Start small, iterate, test, learn, repeat.
Fab. Nikki?
Yeah, I think I'm agreeing with you, Gaz. Keep it simple. What's the single smallest thing you can do first that gets you a little bit closer? Then do the next thing, then do the next thing. Just keep it really, really simple.
And Alex?
Oh, Nikki, you stole my words. I was going to say keep it simple, because this is all, this risks being a complicated process as it is. So the last thing we want to do is to make it even more complicated. We're all used to using our, digital services at home and in our personal lives. And we really need to make sure that this is as simple, if not even simpler.
Thank you. That's really useful. I know I put you all on the spot there, but I think those are all useful things for the clusters to take away as they work through this and work through implementation. So firstly, thank you all. That's been really useful, and hopefully has started kind of thinking amongst the clusters about the various and many elements that underpin their technology, and they need to start thinking about. Just to say, if anyone on the webinar or kind of watching the recording after has any additional questions or questions specifically about the stuff we've discussed today, technology as a whole, please chat to your coaches and they can set up conversations with DXW if you haven't had those already, or support you to think about how you work with DXW up until March next year. we will be having our next webinar on the 22nd of November, and we'll be looking at fostering recruitment on a regional footprint. So that's going to be particularly looking at the lessons learned from the Regional Adoption Agencies programme, and focusing on sharing the learning from the RAA programme and thinking about how that can apply to fostering. And I know lots of colleagues on the call or engaged in the programme will have either been involved with the RAA programme or at least heard of it. So that's going to be a really interesting discussion. As always, we welcome feedback. If you've got any reflections or questions, please feel free to get in contact. Always happy to hear those. And just to say thank you again, both for joining, but particularly to DXW for bringing your expertise and your knowledge, which is much better than mine on technology. I think that's been really helpful, and hopefully we'll start some useful conversations with our clusters. Thank you all and have a lovely day.